But I thought we would start just by looking at a couple images and talking a bit about where you started and where you are. Um, since your work and those of us who are old enough to have read alternative comics in the 1980s, right? You got your start there. One of the first publications that you were involved with was Centrifugal Bumble Puppy, which ran for a few issues in the late 1980s, and you edited this, and you contributed occasional pieces to it, but it was largely work that you would solicit from other cartoonists. And one of the pieces that many people in the audience might have never seen, I don't think Centrifugal Bumble Puppy has ever been collected or
I
anything
think
like
it's been burned down.
that. Was this ad, a contest, help your president undermine a Central American nation. What you have to do. In 25 words or less, tell us why the United States is perfectly justified in invading Nicaragua. The top three entrants, as judged by your fearless editor, Joe Sacco, will have their statements sent to Ronald Reagan. That's right, Mr. Big himself. That way, he'll have some reasons ready for the American people when he finally does mount the invasion of Nicaragua. As I was going through my slides, getting ready for Joe to come, I stumbled across this from a project that I wrote about his work, and it somehow seemed newly relevant today, in a way that it hasn't maybe in those intervening years in the same direct way. So we're going to come back to this theme of kind of Joe Sacco as a kind of Nostradamus figure, whose kind of dire accounts of especially American politics seem to be evergreen, for better or worse, mainly worse, it seems. And then after that, after Centrifugal Bumble Puppy goes away, Joe starts his own series, Yahoo, in that alternative comics tradition, like Daniel Klaus's Eight Ball, or Peter Bagg's Hate, or Adrian Tomina's Optic Nerve. There was Joe Sacco's Yahoo, that ran for 6 issues. In that kind of storied autobiographical underground comics tradition, one of the opening stories in the first issue begins with the phrase, "Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Sacco, and I'm a cartoon genius." So, along with being being a kind of political satirist, right? Joe was also a very humble autobiographical cartoonist from the very beginning of his career. And in Yahoo, you see some of his major themes emerge, although they're often in a more expressive, in a more with the pages that are maybe busier with more exclamation points than your later work would have. But you would begin writing about war and writing about the news and writing about American politics pretty early on. And that would then be followed in the 1990s with the 9-issue comic book series Palestine, that many of you are probably familiar with. It then became really well known when it was collected as a book, along with Safe Area Garage, which you conceived as a book-length project. Right. So I was wondering, with kind of that in mind, many of you have probably read some of these works. If you could just talk a bit about what that journey has been like from alternative and independent comics, from the kind of floppies and the magazine anthologies, then from the 1980s to the 2000s, kind of becoming one of the foremost graphic novelists, even though you don't make graphic novels in that sense of the term. Your works are nonfiction, right? What has that felt like, and how has your sense of comics changed as you've moved from doing shorter pieces to longer pieces, as you've moved from staple-bound comic book issues to bound book-length comics?
Tell me if you can't hear me, and thank you for coming. Thank you very much for coming. It's been sort of an interesting journey, and sometimes I feel like I'm floating on economic trends or trends in the publishing world. Because when I started out doing comics, they were just those floppy comics, 24, 32-page comics that some of the older people in here will remember as the only way you saw comics. And so when graphic novels came into being, it's basically when someone like me could make a living at it. The distribution changed from having to go to a comic book shop, and my comics, Palestine, those floppies, were on the same shelves as superhero stuff, and you had to go to a comic book store. And I myself was uncomfortable going to comic book stores because they were so full of the superhero stuff and the toys and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the sales of those comics were very low. Um, there were 9 issues, and by the ninth issue in North America, Palestine was selling like 1,500, and the whole of North America. So I'd wondered why I'd done a comic like Palestine, because it
Mm-hmm.
was clearly not going to be selling much. But once things became graphic novels, collected into book form, getting into bookstores, a whole new audience started to see them and appreciate them.
Mm-hmm.
So that allowed me to actually have a career, which I was thinking of giving up because things were so dire at a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
But with that's come a bit of ambivalence about, I don't know how to put it exactly, perhaps the gentrification of comics.
Mm-hmm.
As they became more mainstream, more adult, some of the edge began to be taken off. And it's not as if great comics weren't and aren't being produced, or great graphic novels,
Mm-hmm.
but the underground aesthetic, which I sort of grew up with, the old American underground cartoonists had a big influence
Yeah.
on me, that you didn't see it as much. And in some ways these days, I feel a little somehow removed from it. And I kind of want to get back to that aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
back to the older stuff I used to draw, like those Yahoos.
Yeah. And with the gentrification of comics, like one way to think about it is to think of your work in comics journalism, a term that you use to describe your work, or some of your work. And these are a couple of examples from the mainstream press, right? These are both collected in your book Journalism, that kind of collects a lot of your shorter works from the 90s and the early 2000s. The piece on the left, a rare colored Joe Sacco comic. Most of your work is black and white. You didn't color? Did you color
I
this
did
yourself?
not color it because I don't know how to use Photoshop still, so I got someone else to color it.
This was published in Details magazine in the late 90s. And on the right is a piece about Gaza from the New York Times in the early 2000s. And I'm curious about the comics journalism form, and we'll get back to the satire in just a moment. When you're doing a piece in the comics form, like are you hoping to get something across that feels different than in print journalism or prose journalism? Do the comics, especially when you're working in a mainstream venue like the New York Times or Details magazine, right? Are comics providing something that other media forms, photography, just prose, don't?
I think in some ways they do, because I mean, if you just look at these images, for example, the one on the right, um, in prose, I mean, I'm a great believer in prose and reading prose, but you just look at that image and you're situated right away. You see a bulldozer and you get the impression of what's going on. There are kids throwing rocks at the bulldozer. Some guy on the right hand side has shown up with an M16 and is probably going to get himself hurt or other people hurt. But right away, the reader is there. That's kind of the main thing I'm trying to do is just pull the reader into sort of the ditches and the dust of those sorts of places. And I think that's what comics can do. And sort of the having many panels over many pages, you can create an atmosphere, I think, of what a place looks like and feels like. And this is something I got really from some of the new journalists I was reading, particularly someone like Michael Herr, who wrote a book called Dispatches about the Vietnam War. And I'd read other books about the Vietnam War that were kind of like, on this day this happened, this day this happened. And you get a sense of the timeline. But when I read his book, I could sort of feel the mud on my boots.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even wearing boots. And so to me, that's prose, but then it's like, how do you get that sort of feeling in something like a comic? And I think it's very possible to do it with comics.
Yeah.
If you're paying attention and if you're doing the right research, and just keeping your eyes open.
Hmm. And there is in your work, like this is the cover and then a page from Footnotes in Gaza from 2009. Your work is, especially Footnotes in Gaza, but really all of your nonfiction work is so intensely researched and sourced. You do, I know, having talked with you for the past couple of days, like you do a lot of interviews, you go out into the field and you spend a lot of time with people. And then you go back to your studio and you spend a lot of time kind of figuring out how to tell their stories in kind of script form, and then figuring out how to draw their stories, right? With
Right,
that.
right.
And I'm curious how that process kind of works for you, and what you get out of that long research gestation period that your journalism has. It makes it really different than mainstream journalism that is more and more immediate, right?
Yeah.
Journalism, not it isn't even printed the next day that a reporter writes a story now, right? Journalism is happening instantaneously on social media, and your journalism has this interesting temporality to it, where the events you're reporting on are always happening in the past, but your work seems to gesture towards things that are going to happen or things that are always happening. This is something that we'll get to with Watching Future Riot for sure.
Well, I mean, some topics are perennial.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, uh, the question of Palestine is definitely a perennial topic.
Mhm.
Um, so it still has resonance. But I'm also looking for stories that are universal, even though they take place in a certain time.
Mhm.
I'm one of those people who thinks that human nature doesn't really change over time.
Mhm.
So if you can capture what people felt like or how they felt in a moment of crisis, that's still going to pertain.
Mhm.
If you're reading it, it could still resonate
Mhm.
somehow. And I think I've read so much nonfiction. I read a lot of history,
Mhm.
and to me, historical events always seem present
Yeah.
to me. I can read about ancient Mesopotamia, and it all sort of makes sense to me. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, it's a different society. There were different values, different things forced upon people,
Mhm.
but they had some of the same troubles,
Yeah.
and um, they seem alive to me.
Mhm.
Those people seem alive to me. So the historical nature to me is always wrapped up
Mhm.
in what I'm doing. So when I was trained as a classical journalist, I wanted to write stories in 45 minutes. That's
Yeah.
kind of how I originally thought about going into things. But because I'm able to reflect more, do deeper research, I'm able to bring in that historical element
Mhm.
to show how um, things that took place in the past
Mhm.
are going to will matter today. I mean, I'll give you an example. Um, when I'm doing a book now with Chris Hedges, another book with Chris Hedges, but we were in the early 2000s. We went to Gaza together, and we found one of the co-founders of Hamas,
Mhm.
Al Rantisi, and we asked him about something that happened in 1956
Mhm.
when Israeli troops came through Gaza during the Suez Canal crisis and were screening for guerrillas, fedayeen, but really they were shooting people, lining them up and shooting them. And Al Rantisi's uncle was taken out and shot.
Mhm.
And Rantisi was 9 years old. And he said, I'm telling you this story now, and I'm almost feel like I'm going to cry.
Mhm.
And he said, they planted hatred in our hearts.
Mhm.
So that's why I did a whole book about what happened in 1956. And I, because that's the incidents. The incidents took place then when his
Yeah.
dad was killed. It happened in 1956, and I tell the story in juxtaposition with what was happening when I was there,
Mhm.
when homes were being demolished. It was during the Second Intifada. Gaza was being bombed, and to me, it's like a continuum.
Mhm.
And one guy actually said to me, "Events are continuous."
Yeah.
And that always strikes me, the way that history plays itself out. And for some people, particularly the Palestinians, they cannot romanticize the past like others can. We can romanticize the Revolutionary War.
Mm-hmm.
And in Britain, they can romanticize the Battle of Britain in 1940 because it stopped. But what's happening to the Palestinians is continuous.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to show the past.
Yeah.
And so the time I spend allows me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to just say, well, this happened today. Because actually, how does what happened today relate to anything else?
Mm-hmm.
Or in what context is this happening today? That's pretty important to me.
Yeah. And your work, there's other works that I think show this as well, like The Great War from 2013, a 24-foot panorama of the Battle of the Somme in World War One. If you haven't encountered this, I really recommend it. It's kind of a cyclorama and the Bayeux Tapestry and a Joe Sacco work of comics journalism kind of all wrapped into one. And it's just it's beautiful and it's terrible. And as you look at it, it's overwhelming. But you've also, you've returned to the Yahoo style satire already with works like Bump from 2014, and you've written about the environment and about Indigenous communities in Canada. I'm in Paying the Land, and more recently, this past year, a collection of your satirical, I guess very serious but still satirical comics about Gaza was published and won an Eisner Award. They were originally published in the Comics Journal online. And along with that, this fall, The Once and Future Riot was also published. So I thought we'd talk about this book for a bit since it's the new one.
All right.
And then we can maybe I can ask you about the next one after that.
Okay.
But this one, going back to that sense of the kind of temporality of your work and the time that you take to understand the past and the present and how they overlay with one another. This book also has a kind of interesting history to it. It's about an event that happened in 2013, and you did the reporting. Right, this is towards the beginning as you're going to the scene. Right, you did the reporting in 2014.
Yeah.
And then the book comes out in 2025.
Right.
So there is a lag time here.
There's
about 11 years
Yes.
when you're working on the book, but also when you had put the book aside.
Right.
And I wonder if you could talk about why that happened or what that meant for the book and why you returned to it
Right.
and finished it up to be published this fall.
Well, there's sort of two aspects to this. I'd been to India before and done a story from India, and I wanted to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And my contact there wrote to me and said, maybe you're interested in these riots that took place.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of read about them, and I thought, well, I don't know. It's just like detailing another atrocity. I don't know if I'm that interested in that particular subject.
Yeah.
But then I thought about it a little more, and it occurred to me it would be interesting to go to a place where there had been violence about some months or a year down the road, and ask people, what are their narratives about what happened?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what stories do they tell themselves about violence and killings that took place in their villages? And that was the basic idea, to go and do that. So that's the reason why it's a year later I'm doing the reporting.
Yeah.
But I was trying to find out what stories people construct.
Mm-hmm.
And often it turns out there was a lot of prevaricating, outright lies. But, as a journalist, then what the idea is, okay, well, here are what people say. Now I'm going to try to find out what actually happened.
Yeah.
And that took a bit of footwork, but you can sort of juxtapose those things side by side because we all construct narratives.
Yeah.
Everything's a narrative. Going to war with Iraq in 2003, was it? I can't even remember now. During the Bush years, the narrative was there were weapons of mass destruction. When the United States got involved fighting the North Vietnamese, the narrative was that the North Vietnamese had attacked U.S. boats, U.S. ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. all these things are stories,
Yeah.
and often they've been shown not to be true. We live on narratives, so that's something that's I was thinking about as I was doing that story. I put it aside. I did all the research. I came back and I wrote a script, and I did about 10 to 15 pages, and then I just couldn't continue because it's a violent story, and I've been spending a lot of my life drawing these violent stories and thinking about it, and I just couldn't deal with it. So I decided to do a book about Indigenous people in Canada, because I thought, okay, resource extraction and Indigenous people, I'll do a story that sort of is about climate change, but where it begins with resource extraction. And I went up there, and actually the elephant in the room when I was talking to Indigenous people were the residential schools. I'm sure you've heard about the residential schools where they would pluck kids from the bush and fly them to schools hundreds of miles away. Often their parents wouldn't even know where they were going. People my age, I'm 65, people my age were taken as children from the bush at ages 6 and 7. And at the residential schools, they were sort of beating the indigeneity out of people, basically. They were regimented, they were Christianized, they were given numbers, and there was a lot of abuse, not just by the staff and the church, but also abuse, child-on-child abuse. And so when those kids returned to their communities, often they could no longer speak their languages because they were beaten if they spoke their languages in these schools. So they couldn't communicate with their grandparents and sometimes even with their parents. And, how is culture transmitted? And the Canadian government did this because they wanted to break Indigenous people from the land because there were resources on the land. Anyway, so obviously I'm thinking, oh, well, this is a very violent story too. I mean, I did the Canadian story to get away from violence, and I found myself, okay, it's a different form of violence. It's not a cavalry charge. It's a school, but you see the violence playing out on the streets of, Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, where it really messed up the communities. They're trying to regain something now. In any case, I finished that book, and I thought, okay, I guess I'm not going to get away from violence, so I will return to the India book. And the other reason to return to the India book is because, you trouble people, you talk to them, sometimes they have to recount stories that are really troubling to them, and you kind of have to honor that they told you those stories, and are you just going to let them float in the ether? You've got to make something out of it, or else you're doing another form of violence in a way.
As between that period, 2014 to when you really start working on the book, did your understanding of the riot, or did your feelings about the people you had interviewed change or gain clarity?
Well, I'd written the script before, most of it. I changed the script when I'm actually drawing it. And even the people who were just clearly lying about what had happened, I tried to sort of see the humanity in them too. Because, I think we're all part of this soup, right? And so it's not as if I wanted to keep that in mind. I think what changed for me was I was also seeing, as I was actually drawing the comic, I was seeing what was going on in the United States. And the book, which is really centered about a riot, and this idea I had of what are the narratives people tell each other about, became almost a bigger narrative. Like, what are the narratives we tell ourselves about something called democracy? And while I was there, I began to understand that that violence and what we call democracy can sort of go hand in hand. They can be, I wouldn't even say it's democracy, because I really separate democracy from what we have, which are electoral politics, electoral regimes,
Yeah.
where we turn up every few years to choose a candidate that is basically pre-selected for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we think we have some agency, which I would really question. But obviously, politicians, you see it in relief in India,
Mm-hmm.
but we're seeing it very clearly here now. Politicians use fear. They're trying to climb on the backs of people's fear to get power. And I mentioned this last night, but the Nazi philosopher Carl Schmitt kind of said it best, that politics needs an enemy. And if you want to get people to pay attention and to support you, you get them fearful and you provide an enemy. Sometimes there are real enemies, but often they are manufactured. And I think we can see this in the United States, where the immigrant becomes the enemy. And it's not just the illegal immigrant that is not here, doesn't have papers. It's they're rapists, they're murderers, they're the worst of the worst. I mean, another story that's being told, and you hear it over and over. And I'm not the first one to say that when you begin to hear things over and over, it sort of seeps in.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I'm answering your question
no,
exactly, but
yeah. And the book, I hope you all read it. It's a really striking, amazing book. That's heartbreaking in the way that people probably expect from your work. But it also, with this one in particular, it felt like there was a kind of sharp edge to its argument that for me at least felt a little new, or at least it harkened back to that earlier, more kind of underground artistic period of yours. And you do some things that you do often, where you kind of give us images of atrocities, but then as the book unfolds, right, you also have these moments where you're interviewing subjects and they're trying to explain the atrocity to you, and you do such a wonderful job of, especially in this sequence here in the left page, where you have overlaid on top of a scene, you have Joe on the left talking to someone on the right about this. And as the book unfolds, as you already mentioned, the stories that you get from your interview subjects, they don't match with one another, certainly, and they don't seem to match with what actually happened.
right.
And you draw that out both in the word balloons and in the narrative boxes, the text boxes, but you also make it so visually apparent that the stories are literally kind of resting on top of the events,
Right.
and kind of providing a kind of surface to them that doesn't match with what's underneath. And I wonder if that is intentional, if this book became about kind of narratives and what it means to tell a story about reality versus thinking about how to represent what actually happened.
I mean, to give you credit, I would say that's great. I do that. I guess I do that. And I guess I do it that way, but that's why you're a comic scholar. I do a lot of things that are very instinctual.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, you often putting what someone's saying over, either describing what they're doing or even sometimes counterpoint, showing something else maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what you can do with comics.
Mm-hmm.
If you're asking, what is it about comics that prose can't do, is to trouble the reader with these sorts of juxtapositions.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's saying something and you're seeing either something else or some other version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there are these striking illustrations like this one, the tractor going over the riverbank here, is also, I think, the title page illustration in the book,
Right.
as well. When you're composing a page like this, like, what are you thinking? The draftsmanship here is just so amazing, and all of your books have these pages that really just kind of stop the reader in their tracks, whether it's like a double page illustration of rooftops in Gaza, or here, right, this kind of striking illustration that's in the middle of three other panels, right, of this like intense, really visually dynamic act. Um, when you're composing a page like this, are you thinking about the reader? Or are you thinking about the rhythm of the pages and how the text relates to the images?
I mean, I suppose you're thinking of all those things, but it's not, at some point it's no longer thinking.
Hmm.
It's, I think I've been doing this enough that um like I don't storyboard. So I don't when I'm writing the script, I'm not composing this
Hmm.
and saying, oh, well, 5 years from now, when I'm actually drawing this, I'm going to draw a tractor going over.
Hmm.
I do it spontaneously. I'll design two pages next to each other.
Hmm.
The script is sort of mostly laid out, though I will make some changes. But because I have a script, um, I need something spontaneous to do as an artist
Hmm.
every day. So I let myself come up with the images just before I draw them.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that I don't know if it's, I can't say it keeps it fresh or whatever it is, but I just need that.
Yeah.
So I'm coming up with things like this. I mean, this is based on photographs of tractors in a river because I went to the canal where this happened to get pictures of it.
Hmm.
So I felt confident in doing it. What I'm thinking the most is now what kind of tractors are they using? And I'm trying to actually draw specific tractors that are either very common or the actual ones that they were using.
Hmm.
You know, so there is a lot of research that goes into it.
Yeah.
So, but you know, you are thinking of elements when you're drawing something like this. You're thinking of is the page going to feel balanced?
Hmm.
Where are the blacks going to go?
Yeah.
You want to make it so that things aren't lopsided, unless you intentionally want to lopside them.
Hmm.
But all these decisions are made very quickly.
Yeah.
So I can just start drawing because to me, comics, they're long comics. I've got years ahead of me, so I just make decisions quickly.
Hmm.
I don't sweat it too much.
Yeah.
You know, in a certain way.
That's really interesting because your work feels it doesn't
Sweated.
it just feels so intentional, right? It feels so designed and so careful and so measured and so researched, right?
Well, it is. All that's really true. And it's not that this won't take me a long time to do, but the basic design of the page comes to me very quickly. And then actually completing the page is what takes a lot of work.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. So maybe one more question about
Sure.
Once and Future Riot, and then we'll go to the audience
Okay.
for questions. But one of the things that it becomes clear, both your work about Gaza and your work in the Once and Future Riot, as well as Paying the Land, but these are all works that, as I was reading them and looking them over in preparation for your visit this week, it seemed like one through line that's really clear that unites all of them is that you're interested in not necessarily even in conflict or in violence, which I know is how your work is often discussed. It's how I think the first sentence of the book that I edited about your work was like, Joe Sacco makes comics about conflicts. And then I saw you a couple of years after that book came out, and you said on stage, I think with Hillary Shute, you were like, I'm tired of making comics about conflicts. And I was like, oh, well, shit. I guess, hopefully, you didn't read the book that I sent you that I wrote about you. And then this is the effect. But it does seem like if your work, I increasingly think now that your work is more deeply about like generational trauma, that it's, there are these conflicts and there are these violent events that your work centers on. But what you really seem to be interested in, and in part the kind of the historical scope of your work, it seems to be about how these moments of violence that happen often very quickly kind of resound in these really deep, long-lasting historical ways, and that there are conflicts that we're living through today that have been inherited, right, from earlier generations and earlier struggles and earlier violence. And in Once and Future Riot, at least, you seem to be, the title even implies that, right, this generational trauma, we can kind of see it marching forward in the present. And I wonder if that was something that you think about in the Once and Future Riot. It really seems to be present that you're thinking about not just the past, but you're thinking about what's going to happen next.
Well, you don't see anything changing, and you often see some people benefiting
Hmm.
from these sorts of things. And I certainly think that seeds of future conflict,
Yeah.
um, I mean, these conflicts come from seeds
Hmm.
and they're planting seed. The
Yeah.
ones we have living in today are planting seeds. I
Hmm.
mean, uh, do people, I mean, I think there are people here who are going to know that the CIA overthrew Mossadegh
Hmm.
in Iran, the democratically elected leader in the early 1950s, and things they put in, basically the Shah is put in, and things develop the way they do. There's a reaction to that.
Hmm.
Um, and now there's the United States attacking, but do people know sort of the back history? Do they know why the seeds are coming in? And do we not think we're planting seeds now
Hmm.
that your children are going to have to face?
Yeah.
I mean, we all saw, I think most of you, I shouldn't say we all saw, most of you remember the attacks on 9/11. And do we really think we're not sort of creating a world that might happen, things like that might happen again?
Hmm.
So all this stuff really matters to me.
Yeah.
I mean, and sometimes I'm taking a particular thing like what's going on in India, and you can trace things back to when the British partitioned
Yeah.
India quite quickly and didn't pay that much. I mean, India had its own internal conflicts and
Hmm.
problems, but Great Britain did not help things by the way they partitioned India.
Yeah.
And conflict begins from that,
Hmm.
right? And then something happens that makes it even worse. It's like someone throws a gasoline on the fire or the embers, and it billows up again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's sort of that is the through line is how things will probably reoccur,
Hmm.
or will there's that famous word blowback.
Yeah.
There will be blowback. I don't know why we don't pretend that. It's
Hmm.
easy for some politicians to sit up there on the podium and talk, thump their chests, but they're condemning the future to really terrible things.
Hmm.
So there's that cheery thought. It's funny because I thought of this today. It's the first time I actually thought about it, but one of the reasons I started doing the journalism comics,
Hmm.
like I liked a lot of what my peers were doing, but I'm so politically oriented and I have a degree in journalism. So I wanted to draw something that I would want to read.
Yeah.
And that's why I did Palestine, because I would have wanted to read comics like that. And now I'm at a point where I don't want to read the comics I do. So it just sort of, and that's when you know you have to quit.
Mm.
You have to quit that avenue.
Yeah. Pursue a new avenue.
Pursue a new one.
And just and we'll take questions from the audience. This is an image that you sent me a little bit ago for a book that you are finishing, right, with Chris Hedges, another project with the journalist Chris Hedges. It's called Requiem for Gaza. Was that?
Yes.
And it's going to come out this fall in October of 2026.
Right.
So that's something to look forward to. And you went to Egypt and did interviews and all of that. Do you feel like this book is, after this book, you're turning to satire for your project, your next project?
I was turning to satire before this book,
Mhm.
but I sort of drew a red line after. Really, I drew a red line a decade ago, but it's like a ship, it's hard to turn it around.
Yeah.
But I wanted to really stop doing all of this sort of work. But then after October 7th, and what I consider to be a genocide, I have a great sort of affinity for the people of Gaza, having spent a lot of time there. So it felt like an obligation. I had to address this.
Yeah.
And Chris Hedges feels the same way. He used to be the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times there. And we're good friends. So we both felt like we had to do something.
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways, doing this book was like pulling teeth.
Mhm.
Um, I had it felt like a real obligation to do the book. There was no choice. I couldn't do otherwise. But it was probably the most difficult book I have to do because
Mhm.
I feel like I've run out of steam
Yeah.
and I'm on the rims now, if you know what I mean.
Well, I look forward to reading
Okay. I won't read it again after I get through the next draft.
So we have maybe a few minutes for any questions from the audience, and then
Happy
we
to
can
talk
go
to-
downstairs. Yeah, Jason.
So it's related to Chris Hedges. I'm hoping it'd be succinct because I have sort of a few questions in one. Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt was transformative for me. It's different from the kind of stuff you've done before, and I'm curious about how that collaboration came about, how it feels like it's similar to your work in the past, and how it feels like it's different in terms of the purpose your work had in the larger context of the book, and then also just curious about, because there was kind of a lot of sort of hopefulness at the end that just sort of fizzled out relative to all that stuff. I'm curious in terms of just the impact of the book, if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, the book started, I think Chris was giving a talk in Portland, where I'm from, Portland, Oregon. And we were having a drink and we were just talking about the state of affairs in the United States. Back then, it seemed pretty bad. And we just thought we should do a book about what's going on here. And we quickly sort of just came up with an idea. And it took many months because we were going to like 4 places and sometimes 2 visits to each place around the United States. And for me, I mean, Chris has done a lot of reporting in the United States, but I really hadn't. So to me, it was eye-opening. And, you know, people often have asked me, why do you always concentrate on international affairs? And that sort of resonated with me because things are going on in my own backyard. So for me, it was a good book to do just to get a real sense of other parts of America, which Chris dubbed sacrifice zones. So I learned a lot. Now, as we were not looking for an optimistic end to the book, but as we were doing the book, the Occupy movement started, and it seemed like, even though it was somehow inchoate, it was like people are trying. They have another idea of what society could, how it could evolve, and those sorts of movements often come up and then are suppressed. Often come up and then are suppressed. But to me, it really says something about the human spirit in a way. And to me, it's like those continuations where people will say, "Well, there was once this tent city, you know, in these different places. Now, there were tents, encampments because of Gaza, and of course they're suppressed. But to me, there's an optimism for me because I feel like there are these embers, these little flames starts up, they're crushed, but it's maybe at some point there'll be a flame and someone or some group of people will know what to do with the flame. But the flame doesn't go away. And that's how I see the ending of that book. For all its confusion, for all its drawbacks, I'm talking about the Occupy movement, there's still something going on there that I personally admire. Just like I admire all the students in Columbia and other universities that put themselves on the line.
And thank you for writing that. Like, it really was, it changed the way that I view this country, politics, like everything. It was huge. Thank you.
Okay, no, it had a big effect on me too, so I'm glad.
Do you work on just one project at a time or multiple projects all at once? And how's the book on the Stones going?
Well, the book on the Rolling Stones has been going for like 12 years now. That used to be my Saturday project. It was Stones Day. It's like whatever I was doing, whatever hell on earth I was sort of thinking about, on that day, I was working on that book. So I have about more than 160 pages done now. So I'm in I'm sort of almost within, from my point of view, a year and a half, 2 years is spitting distance to the end. I'm close to the end. And I'm going to continue with that book now. But I'll have to say that book, it's meant to be funny. It's meant to be satirical, but it's all of a piece with my work. It's hard to describe the book, but it all fits in with what else, other things I'm doing. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's all the ideas I've had that aren't journalism. Journalism sort of allows you to talk about facts and try to assemble as much evidence as possible to tell a story. But this is all the stuff that I've been thinking that I can't say this is a fact. That sort of essay, philosophical musings. You know, after a while, you get ideas about human nature, about the way the world works, and that's what that book is about. But hopefully it'll make you laugh. I need to get back to that for my own sake.
So you've published so many amazing books in terms of make adversaries, but specifically, how have you grown and changed as a human being after at least 20 years?
How has what changed as a human
How
being?
have you changed and grown as a human being?
Wow. Got older. I mean, sometimes I'm overwhelmed, like everyone in this room probably is overwhelmed by this feeling of powerlessness. I feel, I also know enough to know that there's only so much I can do, and I'm doing what I can do to the best of my ability. And in some ways, I feel like I have more avenues than the average person. So I feel lucky in that way. It's not so much I think about myself. I think more about human nature, and I begin to wonder more and more. This is my current theory, which might change in a few weeks or something. That almost all the people that are leading us by the nose are sociopaths or psychopaths. And I think hierarchy itself is sort of what makes sociopathy. Because if you want to climb that ladder, you need elbows, and you need to put grease on the, where people are going to put their hands so they can slip down. You need to be able to throw people under the bus. I mean, really, what kind of maniac wakes up and thinks, I'm the one who can take the country to war. That's a responsibility I can handle. I mean, we actually vote for people when they say things like that, right? You think, you're a maniac if you think you can make those decisions. I'm not saying someone doesn't have to make the decisions, because now we're in these huge countries. I mean, 6,000 years ago, we might have been family groups, or let's say 10,000 years ago, family groups on the African savannah, where if someone was a natural leader, okay, we'll follow you until you mess up, or we just don't want to be, and 3 of us are going to be able to defeat you, no matter how strong you are. There's that, and suddenly, 10,000, 12,000 years later, we have countries of 1 billion people. I'm not sure if we've evolved into sort of being able to do that. We're trapped in it, it seems. But it makes me wonder. It really makes me wonder. So I think about a lot of those sorts of things, and then you begin to think of your place in it. Mm-hmm. And it gets frustrating, to say the least.
Maybe we'll do one more question.
Sure.
Go downstairs. Yeah.
I'm curious about the relationships you develop with people you talk to, where these stories come from, the trust they must give you to render their stories. I'm curious how those relationships get developed. I'm also curious if after the fact they see the work you've done and how you've rendered your stories, and what kind of reactions.
I'm in contact with a lot of the people who became my protagonists. Eden, if you've read the book Safe Area Garajda, I went to Garajda a year and a half ago, saw him and some other friends there. Nevin, I don't know if you know the book The Fixer, it's not as well known, but Nevin now lives in Paris, and he actually used the book I did about him he used it to get asylum in France. He took it to the authorities and showed them where it said that he had been kicked out of his apartment. He was a Bosnian Serb, but he was with the Bosniak side, but he was kicked out by Muslim refugees who came through, and he used that sequence to sort of convince them to get asylum. And I always thought, well, if they'd seen earlier in the book where you're running guns to Marseille, that wouldn't have helped your cause at all. Every time I go to Paris, I see Nevin. We get a cup of coffee. He's not in good health, but I see him. I'm in contact with, that's one of the main reasons I'm attached to Gaza. I'm in contact with people who are intense in Gaza and people who've escaped. So, they message me by WhatsApp. When I was in Cairo, I saw Aboud, who was the main character in Footnotes in Gaza. So, I try to keep in contact with those people. They matter to me. I'm not going to pretend I can close myself off from, those people. And as far as like meeting them and all that, I mean, I've said this before, and I think some other venue here in Rochester, but I'm relatively I'm a small guy, basically non-threatening. I've seen other journalists in the way they behave, and they're just kind of like, sort of old hacks that are a little cynical, and sometimes I literally see them talking to people and then just looking around at other things and just rude. So I think I come across as more polite. You can go far being polite.
On that note, it was a great, I couldn't think of a better one for us to maybe migrate downstairs.
Okay.
And I think if you have a book or something that you'd like Joe to sign,
Yeah,
be
happy to sign, happy to talk, whatever.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming.
You're doing great this whole time.
All right. Should we get you?